7:01 a.m. The October sky over the city was the colour of a day-old bruise. From my office on the 42nd floor, I could watch the rain begin its slow assault on the financial district. The air in my office was still and smelled faintly of ozone from the server racks and the jasmine from the small plant I kept on my windowsill. It was a cutting from my grandmother's garden. It seemed to thrive on the filtered light and quiet competence. My fingers moved across the keyboard, not typing, but interrogating. My system, Project Chimera, patent number 7882561, was more than code. It was a digital nervous system I had designed over 15 years. It felt the pulse of the company. Every transaction, every invoice, every expense report was a nerve ending. He had no idea what he was really trying to steal. A flicker on the monitor. A transaction flagged deep within the third sub-ledger of our European logistics division. A payment to a new vendor, registered in a jurisdiction known for its creative banking laws. The amount was just under the threshold that required secondary authorization. Clever. But Chimera did not care about thresholds. It cared about patterns. And this was a deviation, a discordant note in a perfect symphony. I routed the flag to a secure watch folder, another piece of data for the collection. I took a sip of coffee, black, brewed in an old French press. It came from a single origin farm in Colombia I had found years ago. I drank it from a heavy ceramic mug, its navy blue glaze chipped near the rim, a relic from my first failed startup. It reminded me that failure is just data you have not properly analysed yet. My home was an old converted warehouse loft. Exposed brick and steel beams. It was a space defined by order. My sanctuary from the corporate world's cheerful chaos. In the centre of the main room was my workbench. Under the warm glow of a task light lay the guts of a 19th century Biedermeier mantel clock. Its delicate gears and escapement were laid out on a soft leather mat. My hands, steady and sure, picked up a minuscule pallet jewel with a pair of brass tweezers. Restoring these mechanisms was my meditation. It was about understanding how every single tiny component worked in concert to create a single reliable outcome, the measurement of time. Each gear tooth had to mesh perfectly. Each spring needed the precise amount of tension. It was a system built on integrity. If one piece was flawed, the entire system would eventually fail. It was a lesson the corporate world had yet to learn. Pembroke Fairmont III. That was his actual name. He was 32 years old, with the unearned confidence of a man who had never faced a real consequence. He was the nephew of our founder, a fact he mentioned with the casual air of someone discussing the weather. He had an MBA from a school his family had probably endowed a library to. I first met him in the main boardroom, a sterile glass box with chairs so stylishly uncomfortable they had to be Italian. Pembroke stood at the head of the table, dressed in a Brioni suit that was a size too tight in the shoulders. On his wrist was a Patek Philippe Calatrava. He kept glancing at it, not to tell the time, but to make sure we were all seeing it. He did not know that the crown was unscrewed by a quarter turn. An amateur move. Then he opened his mouth. Team, he began, a word that always sounds ominous from a man who has never been part of one. We need to actionize our deliverables and pivot towards a more agile paradigm of synergistic optionality. I watched the faces around the table. Most nodded with the thoughtful vacancy of people who were paid too much to admit they were confused. He was a human buzzword generator, a beautifully tailored vessel of complete emptiness, charisma without substance. The insults started small, personal humiliations designed to feel like accidents. My weekly one-on-one meeting with him was cancelled. The email, sent at 11:59 p.m. the night before, cited a dynamic scheduling conflict. A few days later, in a planning session with the executive team, Chimera flagged a risk assessment on a new acquisitions target. A shell company within a shell company. A classic red flag. I presented the data. Clear, concise, undeniable. Pembroke listened with a patient smile, the kind a parent gives a child explaining a monster under the bed. When I finished, he did not address the data. He addressed me. He walked over, placed a hand on my shoulder, its weight both familiar and unwelcome, and said to the room, "We appreciate Prudence's diligence. It is charming how obsessive she is with the details," he turned to me. "But we are deal makers, sweetie, not paranoid accountants." The room chuckled, not a real laugh. A nervous, sycophantic little cough. I did not react. I simply met his gaze. What he did not understand was that Chimera was now watching him. I said nothing. My face remained a mask of professional neutrality. Inside, I made a quiet, deliberate note. I went back to my office and pulled up my employment contract. My finger traced the screen until it rested on section 11.b. Integrity and Governance Protocol. An obscure clause I had insisted on 5 years ago? My insurance policy. I had a feeling I was going to need it. The quarterly budget meeting was his stage. The boardroom air was thick with the smell of ambition and fear. Pembroke stood before a massive screen, a PowerPoint slide glowing behind him. It read, "Goodbye, bureaucracy. Hello, agility." He clicked a remote, and a diagram of my life's work, Chimera's elegant architecture, appeared. Then, a thick red X slashed across it. It was replaced by a single, dumb-looking box labelled Automated Solutions. He paced before the board, a predator in his own little terrarium. "Modern finance," he declared, his voice ringing with false authority, "requires strategic flexibility, not obsessive compliance checking." He gestured at the screen. "This old way, this system of paranoia, it stifles growth. It smothers innovation in a blanket of bureaucratic fear." I watched the board members. Mr. Abernathy, our CEO, stared at his immaculate nails. Sarah Chen, head of marketing, was suddenly fascinated by a speck of dust on the mahogany table. They were cowards, accomplices in their silence. Then Pembroke turned to me. His smile was a masterpiece of corporate cruelty. It was a performance, and I was the prop. "Prudence, we appreciate your years of service. Truly, the feigned sincerity was the most insulting part. But the company is moving in a new direction. Your position is being made redundant. Effective immediately, the silence that followed was absolute. It was heavier than sound. I did not give him the satisfaction of a reaction. No tears, no anger. I calmly gathered my leather folio, the pen I had used for 20 years, and my tablet. I stood up. My posture was perfect. I met Pembroke's gaze for a single, long moment. He looked away first. I turned and walked out of the room, the sound of my sensible leather heels on the marble floor, the only sound in the world. That was the point of no return. I did not go home and cry. I went home and brewed a pot of lapsang souchong tea. Its smoky aroma filled my kitchen, a comforting, earthy scent. I sat at my large oak desk, the one overlooking the city, and drank the tea from my chipped navy mug. My movements were calm, deliberate. I was not a victim, I was a strategist. I opened my personal laptop, a sleek, powerful machine that had nothing to do with the company. I navigated to a triple encrypted folder on a solid-state drive. The folder was named Contingencies. Inside were years of logs from a hidden module within Chimera. I called it Cerberus. It was my secret feature. Cerberus did not track financial data. It tracked user overrides. Every time a control was bypassed, every time a warning was ignored, Cerberus made an immutable, time-stamped record. and for the last 6 weeks, Pembroke had been very, very busy. The logs painted a beautiful, damning picture of his incompetence and fraud. This was my hidden ace. My fingers flew across the keyboard. With cold, satisfying precision, I drafted 2 emails. The first was addressed to the head of human resources and the company's general counsel. Its subject line was simple. Notification pursuant to Section 11, Point B. The body of the email was even simpler. It stated that my employment had been terminated without cause while I was conducting an active internal investigation, and, as per my contract, my full equity package was to be vested immediately. I attached a copy of the contract with the relevant section highlighted. I hit send. The first barrel was fired. The second email was more complex. It was a formal whistleblower report. 200 pages of meticulously documented evidence, complete with the Cerberus logs showing Pembroke's offshore shell companies, the suspicious vendors, and his personal overrides of the system's warnings. I uploaded it all to the Securities and Exchange Commission's secure portal. It was a prepackaged federal case, tied up with a neat little bow. I clicked the submit button. A small, grim smile touched my lips. It was a moment of quiet, intimate satisfaction. The second barrel was fired. Now I just had to wait for the recoil. Pembroke's first few weeks as the undisputed king of finance were, I imagine, quite glorious for him. He streamlined my department, which was a euphemism for firing everyone who knew what they were doing, and replacing them with young, ambitious sycophants who laughed at his jokes. He began disabling Chimera's modules, calling them legacy code. The system's interface, which I could still access through a back door I had built for just such an occasion, flashed red with warnings. He just clicked override again and again. What he didn't understand was that Chimera was like a living organism. Its controls were not arbitrary gates. They were the supporting columns of the entire structure. By removing them, he was not creating agility. He was creating the perfect conditions for a catastrophic collapse. The fraudulent schemes he was running to inflate his department's performance numbers. Small leaks he thought he could manage became raging torrents. Without my controls, the money hemorrhaged. Chimera, even crippled, logged every single cent. It logged every destructive decision he made. 2 weeks later, the first letter from the SEC arrived. A junior lawyer told me Pembroke dismissed it as routine paperwork. He probably even used the term synergize in his response. The second communication was not a letter. It was a formal subpoena delivered by a humorless man in a grey suit. Then the news broke. The SEC had launched a full investigation. Trading of the company's stock was halted. Panic, I am told, is a wonderful clarifying agent. The board members, who had so diligently studied their cuticles during my execution, were suddenly very, very interested in financial controls. I watched the company's stock price flatline on a financial news network. It was beautiful. The final blow came from our own legal department. They informed a stunned Pembroke and an apoplectic board that my termination had been the trigger. That Section 11 Point B he had never bothered to read had not only made me a very wealthy woman, but had also granted me federally protected status as a whistleblower. I was not just the witness to the crime. I was the architect of his downfall. The look on his face when he realised I was told was a sight to behold. The final failure was a thing of beauty in its simplicity. It was a massive, fraudulent wire transfer to one of his shell corporations in the Cayman Islands. An absurdly large number. The kind of transaction that Chimera would have not just flagged, but frozen, locking down the entire system and alerting half the building. But Pembroke had disabled that particular protocol. He called it a workflow impediment. He personally approved the transfer with a confident click. That click triggered alarms not just within the company, but at the Federal Reserve. It was the digital equivalent of setting off a flare in a pitch-black room. Within an hour, federal agents were in the building. I watched his world collapse in real time. The company's financial standing, so carefully built over 50 years, was obliterated in a single morning. It was a direct, measurable result of his arrogance. He had been given a finely tuned watch and had decided to fix it with a hammer. He found me in my workshop. He must have gotten the address from my employee file. He looked terrible. His Brioni suit was rumpled. His eyes were wide with a frantic, cornered animal panic. The Patek Philippe was gone from his wrist. He smelled of fear and expensive, stale cologne. "You did this," he hissed, his voice cracking. "You set me up. You planted all of it." I did not look up from the tiny brass gear I was polishing with a soft cloth. The smell of clock oil and old wood filled the air. "I did not set you up, Pembroke," I said, my voice calm and even. "I set up a system. A system designed to find and expose fraud. You are the one who brought the fraud. That is a you problem, not a me problem." I finally turned to face him, placing the gear down carefully. My eyes met his. There was no pity in them. "Every protocol you called paranoia was a sensor designed to detect a predator like you. Every audit trail you called bureaucracy was a tripwire. I had built this system with one hidden feature. It was designed to protect itself from incompetent, arrogant men. When you fired me, you did not get rid of the watchdog. You armed it, opened its cage, and pointed it at yourself." I took a step closer. He flinched. "You wanted agility, Pembroke. This is what it looks like when a system built on integrity sheds a parasite." The look on his face when he realized that he had been the author of his own destruction was the most satisfying bonus I have ever received. I watched the aftermath on my tablet, sitting in a comfortable armchair, sipping my coffee from the chipped navy mug. There he was, on every news channel. The perp walk, his hands cuffed behind his back. The cheap bravado and smug certainty were gone, replaced by a slack-jawed, hollowed-out terror. He looked small, insignificant. The board members, my former colleagues, were shown in grainy footage, scurrying away from reporters, their faces masks of panic denial. The company they had allowed him to break was now their shame. My phone rang. The caller ID showed a name I had not seen in a long time. Eleanor Vance, the chairwoman of the board. Her voice, usually so clipped and condescending, was now thin and desperate. She did not offer me my old job back. That would have been an insult. She begged me to help them, to save the company from complete ruin. She offered me anything I wanted, any price. My value, so easily dismissed in that boardroom, was now, in their moment of terror, priceless. I told her I would think about it. I did not take my old office back. I did not take the CFO position they offered. That would have been like winning a war and asking for my old foxhole back. Instead, I opened my own firm, Chimera Forensics. My new office was on the top floor of the newest skyscraper in the city. The furniture was minimalist and Italian. The air smelled of success and new leather. The board had hired my firm on an unprecedented, eye-watering retainer. I was not an employee. I was an outside, unassailable authority. I had more power, more control, and more respect than Pembroke could have ever dreamed of. On my new, expansive desk sat the Biedermeier mantel clock. Its polished wood gleamed, its brass pendulum swinging in a perfect silent rhythm. It ticked with flawless precision. Next to it was a framed copy of a Wall Street Journal article. The headline read, "The Oracle of the Audit: How One Woman's System Saved an Industry from Itself." The article praised my vision, my integrity, my genius. My whistleblower reward and fully vested equity had already cleared. The victory was personal, professional, and total. My phone chimed with a polite, discreet tone. The screen showed the name of a CEO from a Fortune 100 company. A new client, a new, complex system full of arrogant parasites. I swiveled in my leather chair and looked out the floor-to-ceiling window at the sprawling city below. It was my city now. A faint, satisfied smile touched my lips. I answered the call, ready to begin again.